Okay, so let's talk about day 2 of the draft. The Browns walked out of here with 3 players. One who, admittedly, it's a pick I'm not in love with. Another pick that is of a player that, like, I don't know much about, but what I do know about him, I am intrigued by. And when you get it with the other news that the Browns have traded Troy Hill, makes sense. And then David Bell, who I've liked, right? So the Browns get those 3 guys. Let's talk about him. First, we're going to talk about Alex Wright. Alex Wright was what, the second, third round pick, and I don't love this one, right? Now he's a really long guy, kind of in the same vein of Montez Sweat, I believe, out there in Washington. But I don't know. I have some concerns, right? If you're long, I want you to be real strong. He only did 15 on his bench press. Now, granted, I'm willing to give that a break because he does have super long arms, 34-inch arms. And for those of you who don't know, bench press is much easier when your arms are not long, just because you have to travel less distance. This is why NBA players have terrible bench press numbers. It's not because they're not strong. It's because getting 225 up is much, much harder for somebody at 6'5" with 34-inch arms than somebody at 6 foot with 29-inch arms or something like that, right? So, again, not going to be too critical about that. What does kind of concern me is that, like, overall, it does seem like he naturally has a smaller frame. So I don't know if he's going to ever get bigger than 271. So will he ever have inside-outside potential? I'm not really sure of that. Also, when I watch his tape over at UAB, what little I have seen of it so far, I don't see a lot of bend, right? He kind of reminds me a little bit of Gregory Rousseau, who, again, long guy, strong guy, not a guy who could really bend enough to get his second moves off in the trenches and everything else. So I worry about that. I'm not a big fan of this pick. Again, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But this is just my thoughts on that pick. Didn't love it where they took him. But he is the guy that the Browns have. Obviously, the plan for him will be edge. He does have some decent athleticism. A lot of people are excited about that. I tend to care less about that kind of thing when it comes to the defensive line. You guys know how I feel about it. I am 100% a eye test guy when it comes to the defensive line, right? There are going to be some statistics that can lie to you. There are going to be some athletic scores. Raz and everything can lie to you when it comes to defensive and offensive linemen. What does not lie to you is if you can see the physicality, if you can see the bend, you can see the dip, the functional athleticism in a player is really what you want to see when you look at a guy who's supposed to be an athlete. I just didn't see much of that with Alex Wright. So I'm not a big fan of the Alex Wright pick, but hey, I will be glad to be wrong on that opinion. If I am, the next guy that the Browns drafted is a guy whose his mock draftable chart is insane. This is Martin Emerson. I'll be the first to admit I don't know much about Martin Emerson. He really wasn't on my radar when it came to the draft. I usually do not like long corners just because long corners tend to have bad feet or they tend to have really slow hips and they struggle on the inside. I have that concern with him because Martin Emerson will be a slot corner more than likely, especially with the Browns trading Troy Hill. He's going to be competing with that spot with probably A.J. Green now that M.J. Stewart is no longer on the Browns. So that's going to be a hole that they need to fill. He's going to compete there. Again, great size, around 6'2", 200 pounds. Wingspan, great, 79 inches, 33.5-inch arms. Big hands, great 10-yard split, 40-yard dash, not that great, 4.53. Again, he's not going to be asked to be a boundary corner 100% of the time. He's just going to be asked to kind of play the inside. But if he is going to be inside corner, I would love to see him do a 3-cone drill and see how fluid his hips are, because that could be a problem. Now, again, he has enough length to recover for some of these things on the inside, but that's what you worry about. Was a really good man-on-man corner from everything that I have seen from Mississippi State. Was a okay zone corner, but excelled in man. What I think the plan is for Martin Emerson is, I don't know if he starts as the slot corner this year, but I do think that he becomes the tight end corner. You know what I mean? Like, especially in the red zone, he'll be a seam stopper. So when you see teams go out there, they come out with these packages, or they're in situations where they might have a package where they go trips right, trips left with a tight end in the slot. I think Martin's the guy that you want to put in there, because, again, at 6'2" with long arms, he just stands in there much better than somebody at like 5'10" with shorter arms. So he has that physicality. He does like to fight. I've seen that, right? He's real physical corner. Again, you want that for a guy that's going to be handling tight ends. And he's also somebody that you could use in the red zone a lot. So what I see the plan for him, if he pans out year one, is a lot of situational work for Martin Emerson, right? Certain tight ends. So when the Browns play the Baltimore Ravens, for example, I think he'll see a lot of time, right? Because he's good on those screens. He can play the zone. He can play the backfield pretty well. So he's somebody you want to have in there with that length to be able to stop Lamar if he does run. But also, he's also somebody you want to have in there versus those bigger tight ends, those more receiving-based tight ends that the Ravens have. And you know that the Ravens are going to go with multiple tight ends most of the time. This is a guy that you could throw in there along with the A.J. Green to kind of handle that. And then in the red zone, again, with that length, you feel comfortable about putting him on the boundary at times, just because he has that length on him, and he's able to, if it is a fade route, he doesn't have to have great technique. All he has to do is be able to ride somebody's hips and then put his arms up, because that would kill a lot of the fade. So that's kind of the situation that you would put him in, or at least I think they're going to put him in. I think he's going to see a ton of situational work. When they did not trade Troy Hill, but when they made this pick, it was a little questionable, because it's like, man, there's barely enough corner slots to make the roster if you look at it, right? Because Denzel Ward is on this team. He ain't going nowhere. Neither is Greg Newsome. Greedy ain't going nowhere. A.J. Green is not going nowhere. At the time, we thought Troy Hill wasn't going anywhere. You usually only keep 6 corners. So you're drafting somebody in the 3rd round to compete for the 6th corner spot. Now that they have moved on from Troy Hill and traded him for a 5th round pick next year, this pick makes sense. You could put him into the rotation, and I can see where he fits in here. So I don't know a lot about him. The problem with corners and evaluating corners pre-draft, especially when you're not like working for ESPN, is that all 22 college film is almost impossible to come by unless you know athletic directors. So it's hard to get the all 22. And if you can't get the all 22, you can't really evaluate corners, because the broadcast film ain't going to tell you nothing about if a dude's a good corner or not, because you can't see the route. You can't see if they don't get the ball thrown to them, right? You can only see the plays where they get the ball thrown to them, and that don't tell you the whole story most of the time. So it's hard to really get a good grasp on Martin Emerson, just because of the position he plays and what's available right now as resources. But from everything that I've heard, everything that I've seen, I think this is a solid pick. And knowing what you got at the back end of this draft, you're 100% okay with it. So I think that Martin Emerson pick is going to pan out, be great. Next pick that they got is David Bell. And David Bell is a guy that I like a lot. Now, again, David Bell is another guy who did not test well, right? He ran a 4.55 at his pro day, but pro day 40 times are not official for a reason, right? Those can be easily manipulated, but he did run a 4.55 at his pro day. In the combine, though, he ran a 4.77, which is not great for a wide receiver. Now, again, there have been other wide receivers who have tested worse than David Bell and been better players, right? Jarvis Landry is probably the biggest example of all of that, right? Jarvis Landry did not test well coming out of LSU, ended up being a pretty solid player, right? Same thing here for David Bell. His chart is atrocious, right? Like you look at like a guy like Martin Emerson's chart, and then you compare it to this. This is an atrocious chart, right? He does not test well on a lot of things. Had a bad 20-yard shuttle, had a bad 3-cone, had a bad broad jump, had a bad vertical jump, had a bad 40-yard dash, had a bad 10-yard split, had smaller hands than what you would want. Arm length not there. Wingspan's all right, but the weight's there and the height's kind of there, right? He comes in at 6 foot 212. The hands that are like 9 1/4, so that's above the rate. 4.65 40 is what they officially have him at. 10-yard split of 159. I mean, if he were a pass rusher, that'd be excellent, but he's not. So that's a little bit of a concern here, right? The athletic ability does not test off the chart with David Bell, and that's why David Bell fell so far, because again, athletically, he did not test well. But on tape, he looks pretty good, right? He has great body control, great hands, right? The ability to catch the football in the air and not body catch a lot. He has a lot of that skill. Now, there is a distinction to be made when I say this. So when I compare him to Jarvis Landry, I'm comparing certain things about Jarvis Landry. I'm not saying he's the same player as Jarvis Landry, right? So what he reminds me of from Jarvis Landry is when you flick on the tape, a little bit more athletic than what you would assume given what his testing is. Makes ability to make spectacular catch is much greater than what you would assume given his testing ability, right? Because when you think of Jarvis Landry, you think of a really athletic guy that you want to get the ball in hands of. If you look at Jarvis Landry's testing, you would think that this dude can't run because his testing was awful. So that's the same thing with David Bell. Now, David Bell got his production in a completely different way than Jarvis Landry, but at the end of the day, I think those things are similar with him. And again, this goes back to something I was talking about before the draft, right? A lot of the times we let the testing dictate what we want to do. It should not. The testing is there to have interest or give you an ideal on something, or maybe if you feel like the guy has slow hips and then you look at it on tape and then he runs a bad 20-yard shuttle, okay, yeah, he has small hips. Not small hips, slow hips or something like that, right? But it should not dictate your entire opinion about a player. The tape should always dictate your entire opinion. And again, getting open is a skill in the NFL, and it's not a skill that's dictated on how athletic you are. That's more or less your just ability to get open. David Bell has gotten open before. He can get open maybe in the NFL. We'll see. It's going to be an intriguing pick. It's going to be intriguing to see what he does here. But that's the Browns' day one selections. Alex Wright, David Bell, and Martin Emerson. Let me know what you think of these picks down in the comment section below. Who is your favorite out of these three? Let me know. But again, guys, you guys have a great day. Have a good night.